Dear learners, we will be starting with the lectures on the various kinds of business organizations through which the business may be carried on. There are several business structures in India from which the entrepreneurs or the founder of a business can choose to establish their business. In particular, we shall be examining their concept, features, structures, and the legal framework governing the various kinds of business organizations. Since we shall be learning about numerous business organizations, therefore, we shall be covering them in various lectures starting from this one. So, to begin with, as you would know during the course of discussion on this topic, that there are numerous kinds of business organizations. Such organizations are both relatable as well as differentiable from each other based on concepts, structures, principles, and the law. The kinds of business organizations that we shall be discussing are as follows. First, we shall be looking at a company, followed by a corporation, which is also known as a body corporate. Moving on to sole proprietorship, then partnership, followed by limited liability partnership, Hindu undivided family, enterprise, cooperative, and lastly, special purpose vehicle. So broadly speaking, under this topic, we shall be discussing these 9 kinds of business organizations that are enlisted here. In this particular part 1 introductory lecture, we shall be undertaking a brief overview of the introductory aspects of these business organizations. Then, in subsequent lectures, we shall be discussing each of these in further and greater detail. Beginning with the first organization, that is a company. Now, all of us know about companies. We read a lot about them, we hear a lot about them, we interact with their products, we use them as consumers, but there is a very limited understanding about what is the legal framework of a company. The company form of ownership of business is the most modern and influential form of business in today's world. So while traditional business forms like partnership, proprietorship, they still exist. However, a growing number of businesses in India operate as companies. The importance of companies lies specifically in the fact that it has many distinct advantages over some other business models. The company indeed is a very dominant institution in our society today, and all the more so with the increasing government or public sector retreat in areas where it previously had a near monopoly. So from nationalization, we have moved towards greater and greater privatization in economic activities and affairs. So the operation of modern economies is perhaps inconceivable without companies. Now, because a company is a very complex business structure, and usually big businesses, they establish themselves through the agency of a company. So the legal regulation of business through a company is usually very strong or stringent. Now, there are various kinds of companies. So company as a business organization is one thing, and within this kind of business organization there are 28 different kinds of companies which we shall be discussing later in a series of lectures. Then moving on to the next, which is a corporation or a body corporate. Now, a very populist understanding, yet an erroneous understanding of a company is that company and corporation, they are the same thing. While there exists a great degree of overlap and convergence between company on one hand and corporation on the other hand, but in fact, these are two different kinds of business organizations which are known to law. So, a corporation is also known as a body corporate, depending upon the literature that you are reading. So, essentially speaking, it is not a company itself, but it is an extension of the company model. So, those businesses or organizations, they run as institutions. So, for example, we have banks. So, banks are not companies, but they are kind of corporations. In the same way, you have universities. So, universities are body corporates, but they are not companies. So, in that sense, every company is a kind of a corporation, but not every corporation is a company. Example I have given you, like banks or universities, which are corporations, but which are not companies. So just like companies, corporations also undergo stringent legal regulation. So the laws that regulate the functioning of corporations is a very strong law, legal framework. We shall be more in detail discussing about corporations in the subsequent lectures. Then the third one is sole proprietorship. Now, sole proprietorship, most of us know what is sole proprietorship because we as consumers, we do deal with a lot of small businesses, single business persons on the roadside, small shops, so on and so forth. So it is one of the most common, simple and popular forms of business organizations that are known in India. They are also one of the earliest business organizations to have emerged. Now, due to their simplicity, they have become a very popular model for small entrepreneurs and business persons. So, sole proprietorship as a business organization is commonly chosen by small and local businesses with limited financial and human resource capital. Now, the most striking feature of a sole proprietorship is that the business is financed, owned, and managed by a single person. So, if you have got a business idea and there is nobody else who is associated with you, then also you can form a business organization which is a sole proprietorship. Now, this model is very popular and simple because of the fact that the legal regulation of this kind of a business organization is considered to be very soft or mild. So legal issues such as formation of proprietorship, the registration process, the business compliances, the closure of business, etc., they are relatively easy and soft, which is in stark contrast to the earlier two models we have discussed about the company and corporations. Next business organization, again, this is something that is very popular, is partnership. Now, many of the law firms, for example, they exist as kinds of partnerships. So, partnership essentially is the next thing or an upgradation over proprietorship or sole proprietorship that we just discussed. Now, it is considered to be an upgradation because whereas sole proprietorship allows only a single person to own and be in charge of the business, but in case the necessities of the business require multiple persons, either as investors or managers or for oversight, control, running the business, whatever may be the case. In that case, the business obviously cannot be carried on as sole proprietorship. So for multiple persons, you have a business organization that is known as a partnership. So that is why it is regarded as a kind of upgradation over proprietorship. So for one owner, we have proprietorship. For more than one owner, we have partnership as a business organization. Whereas proprietorship is ideal for certain small businesses, partnership accords much more flexibility as it can be used by small as well as medium businesses. So for some of the large businesses, we have companies or corporations. If you see the examples around you, some of the biggest businesses and brands, let's say like Reliance, Tata, Wipro, Infosys, so they are all registered as companies and they are not registered as proprietorships or partnerships. So for big businesses, the structure of company is more suitable, and for small businesses, we have proprietorship and partnership. Now, partnership in terms of legal regulation comes somewhere in between the earlier models we have discussed, that is company, which has got a very strong legal regulation under the Companies Act, and proprietorship, which has a very soft legal regulation. So partnership comes in between. So I have chosen to call it as moderate legal regulation, something in between soft and stringent. So partnership, essentially speaking, the legal regulation is contractual in nature, because when you establish a partnership, all the partners, they have to enter into an agreement with each other, which is known as a partnership deed. So we shall be discussing more about partnership in some of our subsequent lectures. This is just an introductory overview of this. So limited liability partnership is an upgradation over partnership. So just like partnership was an upgradation over sole proprietorship, LLP is a upgradation over partnership, and it is considered to be a hybrid between partnership on one hand and company on the other hand. So the limited liability aspect of limited liability partnership comes from a company which has limited liability of the shareholders, and the partnership aspects do remain intact under an LLP. So it is considered to be a cross between two different business organizations, that is partnership and company. Now, the nature of LLP is more flexible as compared to a partnership, specifically because of this limited liability principle. So it can be used for a wide array of businesses, which may be small, medium, or large. This limited liability principle in the partnership makes it suitable even for large businesses. So many of the new startups that we see growing and taking shape, most of them are registered as limited liability partnerships or one-person company that we'll discuss in detail later. So limited liability partnership, just like partnership, has got moderate legal regulation, just like in case of a partnership. So legal framework of LLP is contained under the Limited Liability Partnership Act 2008, which we'll discuss in some of our subsequent lectures. After that, we have a Hindu undivided family. Now, this is a very special, unique, and a traditional form of business organization that is derived from some of the customs of Indian society and especially Hindu law. So the unique thing about Hindu Undivided Family as a kind of a business organization is that it is ideal for the family businesses, family owned businesses. So if there has been a business in a family which is being carried on from generation to generation, so the personal laws of Hindus, they provide for this kind of organization, which is now also has got legal recognition. So Hindu Undivided Family, as we shall see in much more detail in the later lectures, this has got moderate legal regulation for some of the tax laws as well as the Hindu Succession Act. They regulate Hindu Undivided Family. So while some of the other business organizations, they have emerged from practices of businesses, trade, commerce. HUF as a very special business organization, this has emerged from customs, traditions of the society, especially of the Hindus. Now it is popularly known as HUF. Next we come to enterprise. Now enterprise is a very broad term for various types of ventures. So they could be companies, they could be proprietorships, they could be partnerships. So all business organizations, they are a kind of an enterprise. But when we talk about enterprise in our present context, enterprises are generally classified according to the size. So we have micro enterprises, we have small enterprises, we have medium enterprises, MSME. So the legal regulation of enterprise, it depends upon what kind of a business structure is there. So in the context of this discussion on enterprise, we are usually referring to enterprises under the MSMED Act 2006, which is Micro, Small, Medium Enterprises Development Act 2006. Then we have another very popular form of business organization, which is known as cooperatives or cooperative societies, as all of you must have heard. Like Amul is a very popular cooperative society. So as the name suggests, cooperatives are community-based businesses. And the principle that underlines the cooperative business is the principle of cooperation. So there are multiple number of members in a community engaged in a common business activity. So for example, in case of Amul, we have milk products. So the function of a cooperative is to bring all such individuals who are performing economic activities to a common platform through an association, and that association may be referred to as a cooperative society. So the emphasis on a cooperative society is on pooling of resources of each of the individual economic actors in a cooperative. And so there could be various kind of cooperatives. There could be consumer cooperatives, there could be housing cooperatives, there could be farming cooperatives, so on and so forth. So we'll be taking this up in much more detail in the subsequent lectures. Now because cooperatives, they may involve a very large body of persons who contribute to the cooperative society and even large number of consumers. So this has a very large public impact, and so that is why there is a strong legal regulation that governs the cooperatives. We have some central laws and then there are various state laws that govern the functioning of the cooperatives. After that we have a special purpose vehicle. Now this is a very modern concept, special purpose vehicle, also referred to as the SPV. Now in a special purpose vehicle, this is a kind of a business organization which is established for certain short-term objectives. Now, a special purpose vehicle is a kind of a business organization that does not have any independent business of its own. Rather, it is set up, as the name suggests, for certain special purposes by another main or a large business organization. So, it is a kind of an offshoot or a corollary of another parent business organization which sets it up for specific purposes. So, for example, when large companies they face winding up or closure, so they may form certain SPVs in order to hold their assets for companies in distress, for example. And so, therefore, depending upon the purposes for which the SPVs they are created, their form and legal regulation may vary. So, we will take SPV up in more detail in the upcoming subsequent lectures. Now, this lecture was just a primer on the various kinds of business organizations. So, this was just to orient you about them. In the upcoming lectures, we shall be undertaking a deeper and detailed discussion on each of these kind of business organizations. So, just to summarize this lecture, we have discussed about the business organizations that are enlisted here, introductory aspects, beginning with a company, corporation, sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability partnership, Hindu undivided family, enterprise, cooperative, and special purpose vehicle. With this, we conclude the part 1 of the lecture on business organizations. Thank you very much.